Okay, hello everybody. I'm actually in the process of publishing my mini art school 2 to my blog on wordpress.com. I wanted to use a screencast to go over this part or this exercise for the mini art school because I've been getting used to Screenomatic for the mixed media critique. And I thought it'd be fun to actually just go into the tessellations that I have on my desktop. I'm got a few more things to put there, but let's actually go to the tessellations I have saved on my local drive. So, in reading White Space's Not Your Enemy, we encounter the exercise on page 56, the tessellation, and also within that chapter, we covered the elements of design. And I was thinking about covering tessellations because with tessellations there are many elements that are just present within a tessellation. And without using the mathematical definition, I'll explain what the definition of a tessellation is through the elements of design. So a tessellation usually has a specific size, shape, pattern, a specific use of space, lines, and the principles also have balance, unity, and rhythm. Now, there were some principles that are not always present, but sometimes present depending on the specific tessellation, and we'll be covering them in another example. But for that case, we have contrast, movement, and the possibility of value. Now, within this tessellation, there is no presence of contrast or movement or value, at least not from my inexperienced eye. But there is a definite shape. We have the half circle, and in the half circle, it's the immediate shape that draws the viewer, at least me as a viewer, draws me to the piece of design. And there's also the kind of white space, or even considered a shape itself. So, in the use of space, it's actually using a tessellation uses all of the space on the active page, and it even bleeds off into the edges. Usually bleeds off into the edges. This one uses the entire live space of the paper. So we have a distinct shape or shapes that go to a tessellation, and they usually use up the entire space of the page. There's also a specific size because every shape in a tessellation is generally uniform in a sense that it is the same size and same pattern that goes throughout the entire piece of media. Now, that also creates a certain rhythm throughout the piece, and as well as a balance, since this corner would look exactly like this corner, it's just opposite. So there is a good balance among the entire piece. Now, I do see the example of line because for this specific tessellation it is nothing but lines, but then again, lines are the basic cornerstone of creating shapes, so that's an obvious right there. Now, something that does not exist in a tessellation is that there's no focal point. There's no one point on this grid that draws me to show me a story. It's just a basic pattern. Every piece on this plane, every point on this plane of design is as equally as eye-catching, to me at least. And so a tessellation would be defined as not having a focal point. Now, I would say that there is a unity, as I think I've said that before, it's uniform throughout the page. And so let's look at what a tessellation is with shape, size, pattern, space, line, no focal point, has balance, has rhythm. Let's see what a tessellation looks like with contrast and movement. Now, this is a new tessellation. We have arrows of varying colors. We see the same use of space in the entire page is used. Now, some actually bleed off, as you see how some of these arrows bleed off into the edge of the page. So it is using the entirety of the space. It's the same uniform pattern. There's only one shape. Well, you could argue that there's technically more than one shape since this is like half an arrow and this is sort of like 3/4 of an arrow, but generally it's just one shape because those shapes just happen to be bleeding off into the page. So in this case, there's just one shape using up the entire space. There's a definite pattern since it's just a constant stream of arrows to the right, left, right, left, right, left. It's a horizontal movement actually. So the eye is drawn from the arrows right off the page, and with me, I kind of get drawn from left to right to left to right, which does create a sense of movement as well as with the color and the value in this tessellation. There's a good sense of contrast. It's not as dull as this previous tessellation where it's just black and white and it's on a square grid. We have this vibrant color that actually changes from lighter colors to the darker colors, almost like the scale of the rainbow. Now I have a color deficiency, so it might be a little harder for me to judge, but that's what think what's occurring right now. Um, and so we have a great contrast of value and movement. Um, yeah, contrast, value, and movement within this tessellation. So there's still the representation of shape, constant size, pattern, space, line, definite rhythm, no focal point because there's no specific shape on this that really draws my attention to the piece. There's a good sense of unity. And now I have this other example which kind of breaks the grid a little bit from a general or ordinary typical tessellation. As you see, it's not using up all the space on the page, but nonetheless, it is, I'd say, elegantly showing the potential for what a tessellation can do. If you see, we have a definite sense of value as we have the upper, darker colors slowly blending in on the grayscale to the white fish below. We have the darker geese to the lighter fish, but enshrouded in a dark and more shaded gray and black scale, grayscale. And even you can even see the shape of the fish in sort of the shape of the fish in the sky, and also the shape of the birds in between the fish in the water, which remains consistent with using that space, even this you could say negative space, to its benefits. Now we do have this empty space right here and this empty space right here, but for breaking the actual, I'd say, a grid or a pattern or rhythm of an actual tessellation, it still draws attention to the piece, the viewers intrigued. At least I find myself intrigued, and I picked this example because it was very different than the other examples of tessellations I was looking up online. So I found that pretty cool, and also just overall it's catching the mix of it not actually bleeding off into the paper. And the sense of movement, there's also a good sense of movement as they're all facing the same way, and I almost see as if they're migrating off the page, which is pretty great. Then again, there's still no focal point, which I could have considered since it doesn't take up the entirety of the page. There could have been a possibility of focal point, but then again, there's a good sense of balance still, and that balance is pretty uniform throughout the entire piece, so that makes it with no focal point. There's no really one story, but then again, the movement itself could suffice as maybe a focal point that draws the reader to know that these animals are going off the page. But then I'm probably just going into theory, my own um, my own interpretation of the piece. But as for the elements and principles, that is what I see in this tessellation piece. Thank you for